We are starting with the chapter Cell, which is the building block of life. So, first we'll be understanding the important key concepts of this chapter in detail, and then we'll be giving a quick NCERT reading, and we'll make sure that each and every point in NCERT is explained properly in detail, and we get to remember all the things properly in a methodological manner. And we will also make sure that we'll be able to answer different kinds of questions which are expected to be answered, because CBSE class 10 foundation or the principles would more effectively be started from class 9. So we have to focus on the subjects which are given in class 9 as well, because those will become the foundation for our class 10 board exams. So you need to make sure that all the concepts of class 9 are clear. So we'll not just in one shots, but we'll go in detail, properly complete this whole chapter along with the NCERT reading, and we'll make sure that we know this whole concept clearly. So without any further delay, let's start this chapter, that is Cell, the building block of life. So cell, in the sense, it is also called the structural and the functional unit of life. But why is cell called a structural and functional unit of life? What is the reason? Why is it called a building block of life? Why is it called the structural and functional unit of life? For this, we'll start with starting with life. How did life origin? So what is the reason for the origin of life? So many people believe that origin of life has happened from small water pools. Origin of life has happened from small water pools with the changing environmental conditions rather than the ocean. They did not believe that life started from oceans. They believed that it started from small water pools. So such examples would include the hot springs. As the name suggests, they are hot. So hot springs, in such great environments, they believe that life had started to grow. So in India, such places are present in Ladakh in the Poga Valley. You need to remember this because it's mentioned in your NCERT. So they believe that from these hot springs, various kinds of organisms have originated, and the organisms living in these hot springs are mostly the heat-loving bacteria. So they are the heat-loving bacteria which are present in such humid conditions as well. The temperature is equal to 100 degrees Celsius, which is the boiling point of water. So such bacteria are called the thermophils. So such bacteria are called the thermophils. As the name suggests, thermo in the sense heat. So heat-loving bacteria are called thermophils. So these are the organisms which are present in the atmospheric conditions or environments like hot springs. And you have to remember that these thermophils are unicellular. What is the reason that you're particularly mentioning that it is unicellular? Because organisms, when you speak about organisms, different kinds of organisms, you have to remember there will be two kinds of organisms. So those organisms are either you'll have unicellular organisms or you'll have multicellular organisms. As the name suggests, uni in the sense unitary, one, multi in the sense more than one. So unicellular in the sense one cell will be present, while multicellular in the sense there will be more than one cell, multiple cells will be present. In unicellular, one cell has to function all the things like the digestion, addition and all these things, only one cell will be performing. But when it comes to the multicellular organisms, when you speak about multicellular organisms, then they will be the division of labor. It is not that one cell will be performing all the functions. So there will be a proper division of the works according to the functioning of those cells. So when we speak of the division of labor, then a group of cells which will perform same function will form a tissue. So basically one cell will be there, group of cells will form as a tissue, and then a group of tissues will form an organ, a basic organ, and then the organs together will form an organ system, and the organ systems together will form the very important, that is us, which is the organism will be formed. So this flowchart is very important to remember, because this is the basic thing which everybody have to remember. First, starting with the cell. Group of cells will form the tissue, and group of tissues will form an organ. You have to remember that the group of cells which will perform a particular function, a common function, will form the cells. It's not like the random cells all together will come and form a tissue. It is not like that. The cells which will perform a common function will form a tissue, and such tissues together will form as an organ, and then such organs will form the organ system, and that organ system will finally form the organism. So this is the flowchart which you need to remember, because this is the basic thing which is required for us to remember. You might have already read it in your previous classes, but make sure that you know this flowchart properly. So cell will be there, tissue will be there, organ will be there. Organ in the sense we have various organs like heart, we have lungs, we have the trachea, throat, all these things, and these organs all together will form the organ system. For example, the respiratory system, the excretory system, and all these things. All these organ systems together will form as the organism. For example, we human beings. So along with all the organ systems combined together is what we form human being. Because if you don't have an excretory system, respiratory system, a digestive system, then how is it that you are there? How is the organism present? It is because of the organ system. How is the organ system formed? With the help of organs. How is organ formed? With different tissues. And how are these tissues formed? With the help of the cell. So as the chapter name says us clearly, that we are going to study about the cell, which is the building block of life. So in this chapter we'll be primarily focusing on cell, and the next chapter will start with the tissue as well. So in this chapter, first primarily we'll be starting with cell. So why is it that you're not able to see the cell with your naked eye? So why is it that you're not able to see the cell with your unaided eye? Why do you actually need a microscope? It is because we have the limit of resolution of human eye, which is about 0.1 mm. So the things which are so small than that, it is not possible for the human eye to look at it. So this is known as the limit of resolution of human eye. So that is the reason why we are not able to see the cells. We are only able to see the things. We are not able to see the cells. So in order to see the cells, so the very first person who saw this cell, you have to remember this name, the very first person, the first scientist who have seen this is the one who is Robert Hooke. You might have already read about him in grade 8, right? So Robert Hooke was the first person to observe a cell in the year 1665. Years are also important because that gives us the mark. It's not how much you write, it is what is the quality of the content which you have written is very important in CBSE exams. So all these years, names of the persons, all these things is important. So who is the first person to observe a cell? That is Robert Hooke in the year 1665. 5. So he has observed it with his self-designed microscope. So he has observed this with the self-designed microscope. So while observing a thin slice of cork, he has observed a thin slice of cork and he observed a small box-like compartments and named them as cells. So he was the person to name the word cell as well. So in school libraries, we have the light microscope. So you can observe those in your laboratories. In your school laboratories, we have these light microscopes. So you can observe this, all the parts, the eyepiece, body knob, objective lens, stage, mirror, base, all these things you can observe and understand how to actually use a microscope. So for observing the cell, you just need a simple microscope is enough. But in order to observe the things, the components inside this cell, you need to have electron microscope. So for observing even deeper into the cell, you need an electron microscope. But for normally looking at how many cells are present, what is there, and for all these things, you can work with your simple microscope is enough. So now proceeding to the structure of the cell. So what is the structure of the cell? So when you speak of structure of the cell, the basic thing which you might have learned is that you will have a cell membrane and you will have a nucleus and we'll have the cytoplasm. So this is the basic thing which we are told, that we'll have a cell membrane and we'll have a nucleus, and this is all the cytoplasm which is present, right? So in this chapter, we are going to dwell even deeper and understand all the organelles which are present as well in much more detail, and what is the material with which the cell membrane is made and where can we find the cell wall, and all these things we'll study in much more detail in this chapter. So first we'll be starting with the structure of cell. So starting with the structure of cell. So when you speak about structure, first we'll speak about the cell membrane. Cell membrane. The cell membrane is also called the plasma membrane. So you have to remember that cell membrane is also called plasma membrane, and it is a universal feature. It is a universal feature. In the sense, every cell will have a cell membrane for sure. So the cell membrane is a thin boundary which will surround a cell and protect its content. Because see, if you don't have a skin, what is the thing you will be able to see about yourself? Where is the body? So that is the reason why you'll have a cell, because all the things inside will be assembled in a package, in a place. So cell membrane is universal feature. It is very, very important, and it is necessary for each and every cell to be called as a cell. So cell membrane, which is the plasma membrane, is a very important feature. So what are the characteristics of this cell membrane? So it is a thin membrane which is about 7 to 10 nanometer thick, right? And what is it made of? It is made up of lipids, that is fats, and proteins. It is made up of lipids, which is fats and proteins. So what is its structure? What is its structure called? So its structure is basically explained by the fluid mosaic model. So why is it called the fluid mosaic model? So what is the reason that this is called the fluid mosaic model? Cell membrane is called so because we have already learned that it is made up of lipids and proteins. So it is very obvious that cell membrane will have lipids and proteins in it. So first we'll draw the proteins. So let us say these are the proteins which we have got, and these are all the rest of the proteins which will be present. And then we have got the lipids, which are the fats, and these lipids will have the tail, which is the water repelling ones, that is they come away from water. So these are all the lipids, and these lipids, it is the bilipid layer. Lipid bilayer is present, and this is all the lipids which are present. So we can observe that this is the lipid bilayer, and these are all the proteins, right? And it is important to note that it is known as fluid because the molecules will move sideways, flip and rotate within the membrane, and hence it is fluid. And why is it called mosaic? It is because the molecules are arranged like tiles, and that's the reason why it looks like or in a mosaic. So it is called the mosaic model, and that is the reason why the structure is called follows the fluid mosaic model. So this is the thing. Whenever asked about cell membrane, make sure that you write it properly along with the features and all these things, the thickness of it and what is it made of the structure it follows, and also the diagram if possible, and make sure to write why is it called the fluid mosaic model as well. What are the reasons why it is called a fluid, why is it called the mosaic, and explain this model completely, and you'll be sorted. So in this way we have studied about the cell membrane. So next, moving to the cell wall. So cell membrane is something which every cell will have, but an additional thing is the cell wall, which we need to study because it will be present in the cells of plants, fungi and bacteria. So you have to remember that cell membrane is present, it is a universal feature, but cell wall is something which is present in the cells of plants, fungi and bacteria. Why is it so that these additionally have the cell wall? It is because they have to face the rigid environment, outside environment, and that is the reason why they'll have this cell wall, because you'll have the sunlight or huge amounts of wind, rainfall, all these things which the plants have to undergo. So that's the reason why they'll have the cell wall. Because for suppose if you take a cell of the plant and place it in a salt solution or some sugar solution, so you'll observe that the cell membrane or the cell inside might shrink, but the cell wall remains as it is. It will not shrink. So it is important to remember that is the reason why the cells of plants, fungi and bacteria will have a cell wall, because they have to undergo the harsh environmental changes. Another important thing you need to note is that cell membrane is partially permeable. While cell wall is completely permeable. It will enter anything, but the cell membrane is partially permeable, and the areas of exchange or the sites which act as exchange is the protein site. So these protein sites will be the areas where exchange will be taking place with the help of the method of osmosis based on the concentration of the concentration inside and outside. So it will follow the concept of osmosis for exchange. This is information about cell membrane. Now back to cell wall. So cell wall will be present in the cells of plants, fungi and bacteria, which is the outer layer. So this is the cell membrane, and then outer layer will be the cell wall. So this cell wall is made up of cellulose. Cell wall is made up of cellulose. Cell membrane is made up of lipids and proteins, while cell wall is made up of cellulose. So cellulose, what is cellulose? It is where many glucose units are linked together in order to form cellulose. So this is the cell exterior part. So what is present on the outside of the cell? So we'll have the cell wall and then we'll have the cell membrane in the inside. The cell wall is made up of cellulose, which is many glucose units which are linked together, and the cell wall is completely permeable. And the reason it is present is because to undergo or to withstand the harsh environmental conditions. So this is all we have learned about the cell exterior part. So in the next part, we'll be starting with the cell interior. We'll start with the cell interior part by studying about the nucleus, the organelles and all these things. So what is the basic thing which we have to remember? That every cell will have plasma membrane. Every cell will obviously have plasma membrane, and it will have the cytoplasm in the inside, and will have the nucleus. And additionally, you'll have various organelles which are present inside. So these basic things might be observed with a simple microscope, but the organelles and all these things will be only observed, can be observed with the help of the electron microscope. So electron microscope is essential in order to observe the things in much more detail inside the cell. So until now we have observed the cell exterior part, which is the cell membrane and the cell wall. In the next part we'll go inside the cell, which is the cell interior, which is a coordinated working system. So this is all we have learned in this video. So now we'll give a quick NCERT reading. So in this video we have started with the chapter Cell, the building block of life. So it is technically chapter 2. So we'll give a quick NCERT reading. So what it is say? So it is widely accepted amongst the scientific community that life originated in water. Some researchers believe that life may have originated in small water pools with the changing environmental conditions rather than in the oceans. Hot springs are examples of such environment. In India, the hot springs of Puga Valley in Ladakh maintain high temperatures, nearly at the boiling point of water, even in a cold climate. So these environmental conditions seem to be similar to those on the early Earth, which is about some 3.5 billion years ago. So the organisms living in these hot springs are called the heat-loving bacteria, which are the thermophils, which are unicellular. So this is all you have to remember. That is the Puga Valley in Ladakh, and these are the thermophils. That is the heat-loving bacteria. Thermo in the sense heat. It is obvious. So scientists from the Barmal Sani Institute of Paleosciences, so it is important to note this point, Lucknow, have studied these hot springs and found that the calcium carbonate formed rapidly around them. So these deposits may have protected early organic molecules from harmful radiation in extreme conditions, and they have also helped in the formation of the first protective membrane, the barrier that will define a cell. So calcium carbonate was where the origin of this barrier which will define a cell has been formed, is what scientists have studied from the Barmal Sani Institute of Paleosciences, Lucknow. So all living organisms are made up of cells. So the cell represents the basic level at which life exists. So some organisms such as bacteria or yeast consist of only one cell, which is the unicellular, while Others, like plants, fish, birds, or humans, are made up of millions of cells, which is multicellular. That work together. So, a group of similar cells performing similar functions will form the tissue. And the different tissues are organized to form an organ, and we've already seen all these things. And such as nasal pores, nasal cavity, trachea, lungs will form the respiratory system. This is the organ system, and a group of organ systems will form an organism. So, even when cells are organized into the tissues, organs, and organ systems, the cell remains the fundamental unit or structure and function in all living organisms. So, this makes us wonder how such tiny cells perform so many different activities and what are the different components of a cell. So, that is all. What is cell? What are the components? All these things is what we are going to study in this chapter. So, this is the building block of life, and we have seen this, and this is all the things, the size of the objects and the visibility through unaided to the aided eye. So we can see all these things. Here we need an electron microscope, and here we need a light microscope to observe this, and this is the unaided eye with which we can observe according to the size of the things. So how to study cells? So what do we call the ability of the human eye to see very close? So I've already spoke about this, the limit of resolution of human eye, which is about 0.1 mm, and a cell is usually too small so to be seen by an unaided eye. And this raises an important question, is how the biologists have studied the structural and functional unit when it's so small. So that is because of the lenses, due to the magnification principle. So Robert Hooke was the first person to observe this cell in the year 1665 using a self-designed microscope. You have to remember this. While examining a thin slice of cork, he observed a small box-like compartments and then named them the cells. So in school laboratories, the light microscopes are used to observe the objects using the different objective lenses. You can observe this in your laboratory in your school. And this is experiment. One day we'll study all the experiments all together. And then the estimated size of this onion peel. So how do you actually estimate it? It is based on the diameter of the visible field in the micrometer by the number of cells along the diameter. So this is the formula which you can use for your lab works and all these things when you're trying to observe the estimated size of the onion peel cell. So this is how you calculate things. And then the structure of the cell. So you have learned these cells are organized into specialized tissues, organs, and collectively perform specific functions. So for these cells to function as units, they must be able to interact with one another and with the surroundings. So how is it possible they'll be able to interact when they have a cell boundary? So these boundaries will be interacting from one cell to another, exchange will be taking place. So even single cell organisms exchange materials and respond to the environmental conditions through the cell membrane. You can observe this in the various kinds of solutions which you put the cell in. So the salt solution in normal water and all these things you can observe. The cell membrane, the universal feature of a cell. So every cell is must to have a cell membrane. So cell membrane is a thin boundary that surrounds a cell and protects its contents. So this is the definition of a cell membrane. So it is a thin boundary which surrounds a cell and protects its contents. And it defines the individuality of the cell, and it's also called the plasma membrane. The cell membrane is selectively permeable, which means that allows some substances to pass through it, selectively pass, while it blocks the others. And you have learned how oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange will be taken place in the alveoli. So how does the structure of the cell membrane in the cells of alveoli control the movement of substances across it? You already read it in your class 7. So in the same way, there will be the osmosis which will be happening in the cell membrane place where the exchange will be happening. So structurally, the cell membrane is extremely thin, about 7 to 10 nanometers thick, and it is made up of lipids and proteins, and its structure is called the fluid mosaic model, and we already explained this diagram to you and how and why it is called the fluid mosaic model. So these are the reasons which you have to write when you're writing your answer, which is very, very important. And it's important to remember that proteins in these members act like the gatekeepers in helping the exchange of things to take place. So all living cells communicate with one another and their neighboring cells through the cell membrane. However, the cells of plants, fungi, and bacteria have an additional layer. What is the additional layer? It is the cell wall. And why is it necessary? It is because of the harsh environment which they need to face. The cell wall is the outer covering of certain cells, which is the cells of plants, fungi and bacteria. So it is the rigid structure to withstand the environmental stress like wind and rain, and therefore plant cells have an additional covering outside the cell membrane which is called the cell wall. The cell wall also helps the leaves and flowers remain firm and maintain their shapes and help the plants stay upright. Although rigid the cell membrane is, it is permeable, which means water and some dissolved minerals can pass through it. Along with the selective permeability of the cell membrane, the permeability of the cell wall helps the plants absorb the water and nutrients from the cell. So it is what you have to remember about the cell, and with this they explained about an experiment which you can read. And the plant cell wall is primarily made up of cellulose. It is very important to remember what is cellulose. It is a type of carbohydrate formed by many glucose units which are linked together. Cellulose in our diet acts as a roughage which helps in our digestion. Some microorganisms like fungi and bacteria also have the cell wall to provide protection and structural support to their cells. So what is important to remember? The plant cell wall is made up of cellulose. So plant cell wall is primarily made up of cellulose, and it is a type of carbohydrate which is formed by many glucose units which are linked together. And cellulose acts as a roughage which is helping in the digestion. So this is all you need to remember. And the next part we will be starting with the cell interior, which is a coordinated working system. Cell interior, the organelles, nucleus, cytoplasm and all these things we'll be studying in the next videos. So until now we have covered the exterior part, and now in next part we'll be going into the cell interior.